Guy. Welcome back to another review of a documentary based on a serial killer. And this is another killer that I have never talked about, whether it be film or documentary, so this is a first. Kind of a newer serial killer. He's only been known to the public 9 years at this point. In 2014, he was convicted of 3 murders. Then in 2018, he confessed to a whopping 93 murders. That is, of course, Sam Little. Which I don't have too many books on Sam Little by himself, but I do have a book like Extreme Killers, which has like Sam Little, Andre Chikatilo, Gary Ridgway, which of those 93 that Sam Little confessed to, there's actually been a whopping 60 confirmed for Sam Little. And this is a documentary on how those confessions were made. It's a documentary from 2020, which actually, that was the same year Sam Little died. He died December 30th, 2020, at the age of 80. But it's called The 93 Victims of Sam Little. It's 2 episodes, each one about an hour, 25 minutes, so roughly about 3 hours total. And the first episode is pretty much all about how Sam Little really had a super long rap sheet, how he got away with murder in the 1980s. That turns out they were murders that he did. There was a double homicide in 2 different states that he got away with in 1982. But how when he was put away in 2014, this sort of program for FBI called VICAP was looking into a murder from 1994 in Odessa, Texas, and it seemed to fit the bill for Sam Little. So how these 3 people, Christy Palazzolo, I think her name is Wendy Williamson, which they both worked for VICAP, and then Texas Ranger Jim Holland, how they got together to build this case for Sam Little to confess to this one murder in Odessa, Texas, but then just ended up confessing to 93 murders, and how those all kind of came true, or how most of them came true. So the first episode is really more his background. The one woman that worked for VICAP, Palazzolo, looking into his past and finding all these other murders that were linked to him or believed to have been him, looking into all his previous arrests, his transient lifestyle, how he had traveled all over the place, and really building his MO and his case file up until the very end when they actually get the confession for the 93. And then episode 2, despite the title, it doesn't go into all 93 victims of Sam Little. It goes into quite a bit. It does mention at the very end that at the time that came out, 60 murders have been definitively confirmed to Little, which makes him the most prolific serial killer in American history, as far as confirmed victims go. Which, for about 16 years at that point, Gary Ridgway was seen as the most prolific as far as confirmed victims, because he had 49. Which Gary Ridgway could still be seen as more prolific because he had, I think, 44, 45 victims in one area in 2 years, whereas Sam Little was, at this point, 60 victims over 35 years, possibly 42 years, across a number of states. But the second episode kind of feels like the Netflix Henry Lee Lucas documentary, The Confession Killer, because it does go into how it's such a high number of confessions. Can they really believe him? All these other detectives and departments coming in to interview him, then close cases. But this is more like the truthful version of that, where all of his confessions are actually true. He's given tiny details, somehow that he can remember the most acute detail and how they were able to close the case. So it plays out like The Confession Killer, but with the opposite outcome. It is full of audio. I mean, if you were a fan of like Netflix Conversation with the Killer series, I think you'll really like this because there's a lot of clips of the interview, just quotes of Sam Little, or like once the interview part is reached in the documentary, you get a ton of audio clips of him and Jim Holland. So that's all excellent. You get a number of family members from the victims that they actually do go into. So that's always great. It also goes into another thing that Sam Little is very well known for, which is drawing portraits of his victims and those being used to, find all these other cases, all these other victims, which I'm pretty sure that confronting a serial killer documentary, the Joe Berlinger one, that's more of what that documentary is about. If I had any complaints about this documentary, it would be that it jumps around a lot, and it can get kind of confusing or jarring because it initially takes place in Quantico 2018 with Palazzolo and Williamson trying to build the case. Trying to build a case against Little, but then having to jump back in timelines to where all these other cases were, then those stories being told. It is just as interesting when they do that, but it is kind of jarring jumping back and forth all the time, which it does do a lot. I would probably say episode 2 is a bit more streamlined and focused. For those that are interested in the psychology of serial killers, there is a psychiatrist, serial killer expert, Dr. Jody Johnston, talking about why Sam Little loves strangling and of all these different aspects of Sam Little's psychology. So it is a very interesting documentary. There's a lot of information in it because, again, they're covering around close to 50 years. 50 years of Sam Little's life, as far back as 1970, as late as 2020, after he was incarcerated. So it's covering 50 years. It doesn't go over all 93 victims, but it does talk about a bit. And at the end, it does talk about how 60 are confirmed, some they may never find. And he was still alive when this was released, and how the investigation still continued even after this was made. So who knows? Maybe they will be able to find more. I mean, Gary Ridgway was convicted in 2003, and they found a 49th victim in 2010. So yeah, it jumps around a lot. There are a lot of talking heads in this, and there is a lot of audio, whether it be the standalone clips of Sam Little or the audio of the interview itself, all of which is very interesting. I had not seen a Sam Little documentary up to this point. I've read about him, I've listened to podcasts on him, but I hadn't really seen a documentary yet. So yeah, not sure what else to say about it. Unfortunately, this will be another long video because there was so much information that I took notes on. So I apologize ahead of time for that. But yeah, I watched this on Tubi. Again, it's 2 episodes, each 1 hour, 25 minutes. The first half is his backstory and building up to that interview where he confessed to the 93 victims. And then episode 2 is like the aftermath. And how and also the rabbit holes that Palazzolo and Williamson did to corroborate these confessions and find these matches. Even go to like newspaper.com, because it goes into how Sam Little could remember news headlines from when he killed the victim, and then just having to go through every day through countless counties of newspapers for multiple years with different keywords, trying to find the headline that he could remember, and just how far they went, like how deep they went to, find the smoking gun detail that he could remember, and how acute his memory was as well. So it's very interesting. It's very fascinating. I definitely recommend it. So yeah, with that, I guess we'll get into the short summary, and then I apologize, very long part of the video where I go over what this covers. So now we'll get into that. Samuel Little is now, as of 2018, the most prolific serial killer in American history. After being convicted of 2 homicides in 2 states in 2014, it was during an interview in 2018 with FBI's VICAP department and Texas Ranger Jim Holland, in hopes that Little would confess to the 1994 murder of Denise Brothers, that he confessed to 93 murders. It was with Little's acute memory and skills of drawing portraits that VICAP was able to confirm and close at least 60 of the 93 murders across many states and cities. While building the initial 2014 case, VICAP agent Christy Palazzolo found Little's criminal past to go as far back as the 1950s, for crimes ranging from theft, grand theft auto, assault, weapons, and another double murder in 2 states in 1982, of which he was found not guilty. For many of these charges, Little was given light sentences or released early. It is believed his murder spree was from 1970 to 2005, though some believed he has killed as late as 2012, making his prolific murder career spanning 35 to 42 years. Little's MO was manual strangulation, due to his sexual attraction to women's necks, even becoming aroused during interviews in which he gave his confessions to various departments. His portraits have helped solve many of his harder-to-find cold cases. Though the VICAP team still continues to find victims to link to Little, he died on December 30th, 2020, at the age of 80, ultimately serving 6 years of his initial 2014 life sentence. His confirmed victim count of 60 makes him America's most prolific serial killer, surpassing Gary Ridgway's victim count of 49. Though Little's were spread out over many years and states, around 45 of Ridgway's was in one area in 2 years. And now we'll go into everything that the documentary covers. Unfortunately, this is not only another longer one, close to 3 hours, but one that is just full of information. So I took a lot of notes, so unfortunately this might be another very long one, so I apologize ahead of time. But it opens up with sort of this recurring motif with the tips of like colored pencils, coloring, put to the audio of a Sam Little tape, which is going to be the same tape that's the interview with Jim Holland that the whole first episode is building up to. So for that, I'm just going to say Little tape, but that's something we'll keep coming back to. So it shows that with a bit of the Little tape, saying she had a beautiful neck. What would you do if I strangled you? She was from over a dozen. Oh, she was from. He mentions over a dozen cities. He asked the Lord, "Why me?" This is the life of a serial killer. So then it actually opens up in Odessa, Texas, 1994. Talks about we're introduced to retired Sergeant Robertson. He talks about the rise of homicides in the 80s and 90s, how it's murder capital. Most documentaries will say that. Goes into the February 2nd call of a female body found by a chain link fence. It shows photos of the body with face and genitals blurred out. How he put paper bags on the hands to protect them from any more contamination or destruction. Then we're introduced to Detective Justin Cade of the Odessa PD on contamination of evidence. Photos of the scene and area where she was found. The ME gets a print and she's ID'd as Denise Christie Brothers. shows a photo of her. Then Damien Christie, her son, talks about his childhood and then her as a mom. The cause of death was manual strangulation. Shows her mugshots. She was a no drug addict and prostitute. Shows family photos. Her history with prostitution and drugs. How she pulled disappearing acts. January of 94, she goes missing, found 2 weeks later. Last seen with a customer with, it says fan. This is like the 5th video in a row I've said I gotta proofread these because of autocorrect. Last seen with a customer with a van. They got to him, passed a polygraph, search a van, showed nothing. It shows photos of and inside the van. After all leads exhausted, a report was made out and sent to the FBI for a match of crimes. 20 years later, a match leads to one of the biggest investigations in U.S. history. So that's kind of the setup. More audio from the little tape where he says, "The neck was pretty. That's what I was looking at, not her body or face. I got excited when I seen her throat. Before I knew it, I tightened my hands around it and strangled her to death." So let me jump to Quantico, Virginia. And again, it jumps around timelines and locations quite a bit. We're introduced to Christy Palazzolo. She's one of the hosts, I guess. She's an FBI analyst working for the database known as VICAP, which is a Violent Crime Apprehension Program. She goes into what that is, how crime reports get submitted. She analyzes them, finds similar crimes that match up. Along with Dr. Angela Williamson, she's the VICAP liaison. She talked about her 15 years as a DNA scientist, friends with Palazzolo. 2013, LA reaches out to VICAP for a suspected serial killer. LA 2012, DNA links 2 1989 murders, that of Audrey Wilson and Guadalupe Apodaca, shows a map with their Polaroids over LA. They were found in the summer of '89, 3 weeks apart. Wilson in a dumpster and Apodaca in a vacant garage. Told by Associated Press journalist Brian Melly. Both were found with no pants. Their underwear and shirts pulled way up. Scrape marks indicate being dragged. Bruised necks and broken hyoid bones would lead to manual strangulation. The DNA found links to both to Sam Little. It shows his 2012 mugshot. Background check shows criminal history going as far back as the 1950s. Shows a series of increasingly older mugshots. Goes into how he dropped out of high school, lived out of his car, hit the road whenever he wanted, lived a transient life. He couldn't be found in LA, but a social security check cashing place. Social Security check cashing, places him in Louisville, Kentucky, where he was living in a homeless shelter and was extradited back to California. How they try to find patterns and more victims through VICAP. Shows a timeline of all his mugshots. Goes into some of his criminal past while showing these mugshots individually. Grand theft, assault, rape, weapons, tons of different arrests. Light sentences are released on good behavior for most or all. Palazzolo tries to look at areas. At times he was there looking for strangulation cases, which was his main MO. And then there's a psychiatrist that comes in from time to time to talk about different aspects of Little's psychology. That's Dr. Joni Johnston, forensic psychologist and serial killer expert. She talks about Little wanting to be as close as possible when he killed, hence the manual strangulation. The other similarity in all the cases that they were prostitutes, specifically vulnerable ones, addicts, poor, or mentally or emotionally vulnerable. Palazzolo looks into the 1994 murder of brothers. passing through. He was passing through at that time. Same victimology, same MO, same method of disposal. Makes him a likely suspect. Two survivors in San Diego, or it mentions two survivors in San Diego. More from the Little tape. I choked her out. I don't make sure she's dead. I just want to choke them. I laid them out, and some of them regain consciousness. He gasps, and then look around like, what the hell happened? Then they know. So let me go to San Diego, 2013. Looking into the two survivor cases from the 1980s, Little used his alias Samuel McDowell, which we'll later find out McDowell was his father's real name. Retired Detective Sergeant Wayne Spees on getting the call about the rape case from 1984 and knowing exactly who it was. Basically, Palazzolo called him about this 84 case and he knew exactly what case she was talking about. So then we jump back to 1984, talks about the state of San Diego at that time, crime-wise, drugs and prostitution. On October 24th of 84, a rape from the month before comes up. Lori Barros shows a photo of her. She was abducted, raped, and repeatedly choked unconscious and left in an empty lot. Goes into how she remembered what he looked like and in detail the interior of his car. They were looking for the car. Spees and his training officer go to where the attack occurred and see a car parked. They flash the lights. Guy gets out, fixes his pants, says it's just him and his wife. They had a fight, now they're having sex. But he's got fresh bleeding scratches down his neck, and he's eyeballing Spees. Spees' pistol. This is all told by Spees. Then it says that McDowell just puts his hands behind his back. When they check on the woman in the car, she's naked, bleeding, bruised, lying almost completely upside down and unconscious. They are able to revive her. Her name is Tanya Jackson. Shows a photo of her. Based on description, they know that he's the guy from the month prior. And he's arrested. DNA is taken, which is the DNA that's found in the 2012 search. He admitted to strangling and how, but denied the rape and didn't like being called a rapist. How he said, I should have killed that whore. She deserves everything she got. Another quote from the Little tapes. She looked at me wild-eyed, so I put my arms and hands over her body like that, and I said, this will teach you. He chuckles. She pulled my hands away. Who are you trying to kill? You trying to get me locked up? So, damn. I know it's kind of a bad read. You can't really get his inflection on things, but still. So then back to San Diego of 84. The building of the case against Little for the attempted murder of Barros and Jackson. Gary Rempel, the retired deputy DA, on Little having one of the longest rap sheets with very little convictions. Pre-trial hearing, both women testify how things looked good for a life conviction. Then Barros admits to Rempel that she's a part-time prostitute and she was not kidnapped or raped. Jackson is drunk on the stand and how the defense had an alibi witness, 71-year-old Aurelia Dorsey, claiming to be 44-year-old Little's wife or girlfriend. Goes into the alibi she gave. When Little is called by the defense to the stand, he's calm and soft-spoken. The jury was hung 9-3 for acquittal. Goes into Rempel's plea deal. Pled guilty to 2 charges of intent and commit great bodily injury. The rest gets dropped. He accepts and gets a 4-year term. He's freed after only 30 months in February 1987. Goes back to LA. So now we're in LA 1987. The bodies of strangled women start turning up there. Another quote from the tape. She said, quote, hold on, let me talk to you. So I grabbed her by the neck and choked her and kissed her at the same time. You know I love you. Expletive, I love you. LA 2012, there's another DNA hit. Carol Alford, there's a photo, 41 years old, found strangled in July of 87. 5 months after his release, photos of crime scene and evidence. DNA on her shirt links Little. Now with DNA from her, Nelson, and Apodaca, and survivors in Mississippi. A strong case for multiple murders is made. September 2nd, 2014, after 2 weeks of testimony, 74-year-old Little is found guilty in all 3 murders. Shows a clip of Apodaca's son and Nelson's sister in court. 3 consecutive life terms, shows prison mugshots. Clip of Little in court maintaining his innocence. Photo of him with his fist in the air in defiance as he's wheeled out, because at this point he's in his mid-70s, he's in a wheelchair. Files appeal after appeal. Palazzolo still thinks he's responsible for Diddy's brother's 1994 murder. So we go to Quantico 2018. Palazzolo and Williamson get a call from Texas Ranger Jim Holland about Sam Little. How the 3 can now build a case against Little and get a confession for brothers, possibly more. Their next step is to confront him in prison. It goes into how for years Little was able to get off charges or released early, so he thought he'd easily win an appeal, and now that he's exhausted all of his appeals, he's there for life. So now he may talk to build the best case possible for... It goes into how they're trying to build the best case possible for Holland's interview with Little. Palazzolo does a deeper dive into his life, how he was a boxer, artist, and painter, and goes deeper. So now it goes more into his backstory. So like 1940, he's born, grew up in Lorain, Ohio. Little was his mother's name, McDowell his father's. Dr. Joni Johnston on his issues in school, and those being due to being born to a very young mother who's unable to care for him. Involved in the criminal justice system at 13, lived with his mother until 1973. Then she died, and that was when he left. Shortly after, he met Aurelia Dorsey in prison for armed robbery. They began traveling together and would for the rest of her life, because she died way before him. She'd steal, he'd sell what she stole on the streets. She always defended him despite his abuse. Dr. Johnston on his attachments to her being transactional, like only has feelings for her if he can get something in return from her. Next, looking into his MO, which would be manual strangulation, and his victimology, mostly sex workers, but also runaways and hitchhikers. Dr. Johnston on him believing going after high-risk, vulnerable women of this type would be low law enforcement, or law enforcement may not care or notice, especially in the 80s and 90s. Amidst the crack epidemic and Little already being involved in the workings of the legal system. And this is put to Little's continuous mugshots and clips of 80s arrests of prostitutes. He moved often, used aliases, left no weapons or evidence, traveled with an alibi witness, and went after those who would be missed. Palazzolo and Williamson discover a series of murders in 1982 across 2 states. Photos of the crime scenes and his mugshot. Another quote from the tape. Was she my favorite? No. I think he says shit, because the expletives all have stars. Shit, all of them were my favorite. Yeah, I love all of the women. He laughs. One can't be no bigger favorite when they die. The 2 murders they're looking into are Patricia Mount in Florida and Melinda or Mindy Lepre in Mississippi. Shows their photos tacked on a map, a graphic map. So first we go to Pascagoula, Mississippi, 1982. Bob Lepre, Mindy's brother, on how she had been a prostitute working near the shipyard. Friends saw her get in a car. She'd never seen again. She was 22, from New Hampshire. Him and Pat Lepre, his sister, she's another one being interviewed. They talked about their mother's death during childbirth of the fifth child. Excuse me. How she was as a kid, self-taught musician, the father's abuse, her rebellion as a teen with parties, drugs, and sex, but with straight A's, and graduating a year early, then leaving New Hampshire, and this is all put to photos of her and her childhood. 1982 makes it to Pascagoula with a man named Bill, shows a photo of him. She becomes a sex worker and has a son named Will on August 25th of 82. Photo of the baby. A couple of weeks later, goes missing. We're introduced to Lieutenant Darren Versace of Pascagoula Police Department on the October 4th discovery of her body in a cemetery by the groundskeeper who's mowing the lawn. Cause of death ruled as manual strangulation. How the wood grain station wagon with Alabama plates driven by a black man was seen by a witness. Saw her get into what's seen as a robbery. I don't know what that means. So Little is arrested, made suspect. Vehicle leads them to a murder in Florida. So we go to Alachua County, Florida, 1982, September 12th of 82. Sorry if this is all over the place. The documentary itself is kind of all over the place with its timelines, and I'm not the best note taker. A naked woman is found in a hayfield outside Gainesville. Photo of the blurred body. Retired Sergeant Kenny Mack on her body being found nude. Clothes found next to her. Clothes and body found with feces on them. And then more photos of the blurred body. Retired Detective Gregory Weeks on the marks found on her neck. Bruising and gouges, which looked like fingernail marks. She's ID'd as Patricia Mount. Shows her mugshot. An alcoholic, an IQ of around 40. Spent time with anyone who would buy her a drink. Witnesses place her at a bar the night before. All people there described the same guy in the car that they got into. Black male, medium height, heavy set, facial hair, driving a station wagon with wood grain sides, and a loud muffler. Weeks on how they got a call from Pascagoula on December 1st saying they have a suspect in custody, matching their bolo, which the name they had was Sam McDowell. More from the tape. They wanted me, they say. He got away with them other things, and they tried to get me for anything. So they charged me with her, and they had no evidence. So we go back to Pascagoula, 82. December, Florida detectives drive out to Mississippi to question Little. Weeks talks about the questioning, how he denied everything at first, and then admitting bit by bit, such as being in Gainesville in September, how being arrested and freed so many times had made him feel cocky. Dorsey found at a motel and questioned their third partner, which is the first mentioning of a third partner, which was a guy from Arkansas named Danny. Photo of him, saying Little wasn't at the hotel that night, came back midday and something smelled really bad in the back seat, which they believed to be her of defecation. A clip of the 1982 interrogation tape with Danny, It says that another witness says Little dropped Mindy off at her motel, which complicates the case, and they had to release him. It's not enough for murder. Uh, and they have to try to get a conviction on the Mounts case. So we go back to Florida, 1983. Aside from witness statements, the ID of the car, they also found some of Little's hair on Mount's body. The case is built. Some of the interrogation tape with Danny, about a photo lineup. Just as the trial begins, Danny disappears, which hurts the case. Little has a really good lawyer, and after 30 minutes of deliberation, he's found not guilty. Another quote from the tape: "They don't even deserve to know what I did, because they lied and built up a whole lot of bullshit that we ought to talk about. They don't know nothing." So then, May 2018, it's time to finally interview Sam Little. They're hoping for a confession for brothers, but they'll take anything that he can offer. So then, LA, May 17th, 2018, they show up without him knowing. He's had no access to TV or internet for 3 years, but told that he likes peanut M&Ms, so they brought a big bag of peanut M&Ms. Jim Holland goes in for the interview. Williamson and Palazzolo stay in another room, not knowing how we'd react, them being females. But they do have an audio feed. Audio from that interview, talking about his heart troubles, hating the LAPD, how he thinks Holland is LAPD and refusing to help, as he feels screwed by them and their lies. Holland on starting to doubt himself, which I don't think at this point it mentioned that Jim Holland was widely seen as like a interrogation whisperer. He knew exactly how to talk to people, know what they wanted to hear, how to become their friend, and even get the hardest of criminal to open up and confess. I think they mentioned that a little bit later, but so then we go back to more of the tape. They got me smeared over the TV and everything like a rapist, but yet I have never been convicted for rape. I've never raped anybody, and there's no doubt as to that. So then we get audio from his and Jim's interrogation, which at this point I figured that the tape we keep cutting to is the same interview. But in this clip, we can hear Holland placating his ego, agreeing that he's not a rapist, acting like a friend, earning his trust, asking if he's killed at all, which he says yes. Jim promising to get the death penalty waived if he talks. Little starts talking the Odessa case, describing her in the scene perfectly, with the photos put to the audio. They finally have their case for Denise Brothers, but he keeps talking and brings up another victim and eventually 4 victims. Simultaneously, his cell is searched and his walls are covered in portraits, well done, recognizable portraits. So Palazzolo gets an idea of how to use that. Audio of Jim and Little agreeing to draw portraits of his victims, with photos of him drawing, and how they would give him a city and a number, and his reply would be how many were his. So then another quote from the tape. Let's see. Mississippi would be next. Holland saying how many there. He says, "Oh boy, I got 5 in Gulfport, 1, 2, 3 in Jackson. Memphis is 1. Tennessee, Chattanooga, and Knoxville, 3. Knoxville 2. Chattanooga 1. Kentucky, Bowling Green. Go across the Ohio River to Columbus, 1. There's 1 in Akron. 3 in Cleveland. Indiana 2. St. Louis 1. Omaha, Nebraska 1. Arizona, Phoenix 1, 2, 3. Nevada 1. Las Vegas. All put to dramatization of drawing and his actual artwork. Palazzolo on adding them all up afterwards, and it being over 90 victims. And then over the credits to the first episode, Palazzolo and Williamson on wondering if it's true and hoping that they can get them all out of him in time, as he's old and in very poor health, and he could take these secrets to the grave with him. So that's episode 1. Now we come to episode 2, which is called Connecting the Dots. This is when we get more into the 93 victims of Sam Little. Of course, not all 93, but we now have his confession, so now we start getting into more of his of unknown victims. So it opens up with another quote from the Little tape, where he says, "A whole lot of favorites. You see women, they feel sorry for me, and they think that you love them. You know, she told me, you got some pretty eyes. I don't care where we go. Just don't hurt me." I grabbed her around the neck and choked her ass. I left her lying like that. So we go to LA 2018. More of the interrogation audio. Little saying he first killed in 1970. They show his 1975 mugshot. Placing his spree from 1970 to 2005. Dr. Johnston on how a 35-year spree is incredibly long. It's rare for a killer to start at 29 or 30 and then kill his final victim at 65. Get audio of the interrogation adding up the victims: 16 in Florida, 20 in LA, 6 to 7 in Mississippi, all adding up to over 90. Audio of Little agreeing to go to Texas and continue the conversation. Palazzolo on thinking he's exaggerating, but finds his last victim from 2005, which he called Nancy. So thinking there might be some kind of validity to what he's saying. Audio of him talking about her, saying that she's from Decatur. So then we go to Decatur, rather. I believe that's of Alabama. It's supposed to be Texas. Decatur, Texas, 2005. Detective Nodis Carlisle on the call and discovery of Nancy Stevens, found strangled and dumped by the road near Tupelo, Mississippi. How he knew her. It goes into her as a person. Paul Stevens, her brother, talks about her as well. Laureen Roberts, her mother, on Nancy's drug abuse and sex work. How she went missing in August 2005. Shows photos of her. They had a truck driver for a suspect, but not enough evidence for a conviction. 10 years later, Carlisle gets her son to go on TV and talk about her. And to talk to the paper about the case. So we go back to LA in 2018. That article is what Palazzolo finds the link. Finds that links Nancy to Little, and how his interview matches up with her story. Then it goes into the fear that he'll clam up and stop talking. You get audio of day 2 of questioning. Jim reading the agreed plea to Little, which, the whole plea arrangement of getting the death penalty waived, he was able to get all that in one night, show it to him the next day. How all they have for brothers is a confession of everything known. They need a little bit more. So you get audio of him describing her and the scene. How he described a pipe next to the fence that was only seen in undeveloped crime scene photos. So they actually went back, developed them, saw the pipe in the photos, and then that was enough to get a conviction. So the DA was happy with that. It goes into him being extradited to Texas, keeping his name secret so that other departments won't come in and take the case away from them and take Little away from Holland. Where was I? Oh, it goes into how he starts doing his portraits, his artwork. Goes into how they don't know how reliable his art and memory can be, but in every portrait in case match, there's at least one element, whether Palazzolo says how it might be the smile, the hairstyle, like a necklace, or there's something rather acute that matches up from his portraits to the case. Audio of Little talking about a victim with a necklace, how his details like that, or a smile, hairstyle, or something that is spot on. Though he's not good at remembering dates or time frames and jurisdictions, he could pick a woman up in one state, such as he could drive around and pick a woman up in one state, and then drive around, not know where he was when he dumped the body. Is it the same area? Is it the same county? So they don't know that. The obstacle that provides, trying to find a match case. Palazzolo on calling 3 to 5 departments per confession, then having them go back on cold cases as far back as 1970 for a match, but not saying Sam Little. Little could remember newspaper headlines for the time of his murders, what was in the news. So Palazzolo and Williamson go on newspaper.com and try all different keywords of his headline descriptions. Everyday newspapers on 10 years of each side of the year he gave them, trying to find the matching headline, but also the matching county so that they could see what cases were in that area. And find details he could remember were random but always right, such as weird arches in a driveway where he dumped a body. It shows a crime scene photo in a driveway with the same big hedge arches. Mentions how his acute memories are like his trophies, how Holland built trust with Little, even using some of the same kind of language and enthusiasm at times, which audio of the interview of Little detailing a murder like, I choked her and rolled her ass down the hill, and Holland responding like, oh really, you did that? No shit. So like him kind of matching Little's kind of personality and enthusiasm. Dr. Johnston on how these women were objects of pleasure, and once he got it, he threw them away. Palazzolo on him not necessarily enjoying the murder, but the act of strangling itself. He liked doing it while they were conscious. Mentions how he likes to stick his thumbs right in the throat to feel the struggle for air. It goes into his fascination and sexual attraction to necks. He told them he remembered feeling that way since age 5. And the audio of him saying he's thought about killing since 7 or 8 years old. And at 15, he was reading detective magazines and being inspired by the strangulation of Gloria Ferry by Louis Statler, and how she had a beautiful neck. Photos of them and the magazines. How these magazines also taught him about investigations, but what police look for. He first killed at 30 with audio on that case, and how the closest he got to being caught was in Ocala, Florida. So we cut back to Ocala, Florida, 1982, August 12th. Which on that date, he was on a date with a woman named Rosie Hill. Shows a photo of her. Pulls behind a deserted factory. There's interview audio of how he had just finished choking her in a car. Cop pulled up. He got out. Cop approached, looked in the window, saw her naked body, then backed away, kind of embarrassed. Didn't know she was dead and told them to leave the area. It's private. How he tried this again in San Diego, and that was when he got caught in 1982. So that was the one that was mentioned earlier. Another bit of the Little tape. The next one was that little blonde-haired, blue-eyed Norwegian girl. Yeah, I believe she was mentally incapable, mentally wrong. She had a sundress. She was sitting back there in front of a hotel feeding flies. So then it goes more up into his memory, how he recalled taking one out to dinner first, what she ordered and how they checked her stomach contents or the autopsy. It was exactly what he said she had ordered that night. How not all of his victims were ruled as homicides or were found so decomposed that they couldn't say that it was a strangulation, which makes it harder for them to link to him or even find if it wasn't ruled as a homicide. More of the tape of the girl in the sundress. Her name was Martha. She was found by looking into accidental death records. So September 24th, 2018, temporarily moved from LA to Texas. Footage of him being transported. Sergeant Justin Cade on transporting Little and being with him on the Texas Rangers jet. How we talked about his murders with a mix of recollection and arousal, but with no remorse. So then we go to Odessa, Texas. Little taken to the courthouse for a short hearing. There's footage of the hearing. Damian Christie, Denise brother's son, on not attending, but glad that Little was confessing. So we go back to Decatur, Texas. He's then flown and housed there to be near Jim's office. He's given an art studio in his cell. His portraits being shown to family members. Damian Christie, on seeing the one of his mother and saying that it was rather uncanny. Another interview between Jim and Little, this time with video and audio feed for Palazzolo and Williamson. Them reaching out to other agencies so that they can verify Little's info and closed cases. So we jump to Cleveland, Ohio, October 2018. Rick Bell, who is the assistant prosecutor of Cuyahoga County, being contacted about 3 Sam Little cases in Cleveland. One was July 3rd of 1984, a decomposed body found in an industrial area in a closed stairwell to a basement, where bodily fluids were found seeping under the door. She had been there 1 to 2 months. ID'd as Mary Jo Payton, shows her mugshot. They met at a bar. She left with him thinking that they were going for more drinks. And then another one in 1991, which we get audio of the tape, pulling up on a woman and 5 guys smoking weed. All he could remember was leaving her in a field and covering her with tires. Shows the crime scene photos. She was Rose Evans from New York, came to Cleveland for work, got hooked on coke. So we're introduced to Pam Smith, her sister. On Rose as a person, she was nice, 5 years older, do anything for people. Shows Rose's mugshot. Her being warned about prostitution and being told that Rose was found. Then how the third victim is a Jane Doe, still looking for the connecting file, but they think it was sometime between 1977 and 79. She was dumped near a highway. So we go to Pascagoula, Mississippi, fall of 2018. Sergeant Darren Versace rejoins the investigation. Him on Little confessing to Mindy Lepre and a Jane Doe from 77. His first arrest in Pascagoula was August 11th, 77. Shows his mugshot. And there's skeletal remains found from December 27th of 77. Actually shows a photo of those skeletal remains. Placing him there around that time. Versace goes to Texas to question him. His worry that Little won't talk to him since he was present at his 2014 LA trial. So he's last in line to talk to him. But he gets to watch and listen to all the other interviews. It shows footage of those interviews, which he finds valuable as a detective, hearing how we got away so many times for so long. Another bit of the Little tape. I ain't never cut, stabbed, burnt, bit, no blood. I don't like blood. Only thing I ever did with a woman was strangle her. So we go back to Decatur, Texas, fall 2018. Detectives from other agencies are lining up to talk to him each day. And this is where it kind of feels like Netflix's Confession Killer. They were advised not to accuse him, just to specify a location and just let him tell the story. Don't interrupt. Save questions until the end. Little's own condition is immediately show the DA's waiver to the death penalty if they came from a state that had it. Also warned that even at 78, he'll still get sexually aroused when detailing his stories. Dr. Johnston on this, and how it's his way of prolonging a sexual satisfaction is to remember and recall of all these stories. Little does recognize Versace, but Holland tells him, "No, that's just some other fat ass to see you," and they all laugh, and the interview continues. It goes into Mindy Lepre, again, how he wasn't charged since another prostitute stated she saw him drop her off at her hotel. Turns out he did, but she came back out the back exit and got back into his car, and they went out to the cemetery. That's where he killed her and dumped her on the fresh flower bed. Audio of the interview and photos of the scene, so he did do it. And then we go to Detective Kevin Allen of Alachua County, Florida. He interviews Little about Patricia Mount, the other 1982 case that he was acquitted of. Get audio of that. How when he saw her neck, that was it. How she let him touch her neck, he caressed it, and before he knew it, he was killing her. It goes into Little being easy to talk to, forthright, open, witty, funny, great storyteller to the investigators. So it was probably easy for him to get these women to go with him willingly, as they did. Rick Bell of Cleveland goes in for his interview. Bell being advised not to suggest that he raped the three women. First is the murder of Mary Jo Payton. Shows footage of the interview describing the position she was laying perfectly. Next case was Rose Evans. How he can remember timelines by what car he had, in this case a van. Bell on how he laughed as he told the story of Evans. And third, the Jane Doe, which they were unable to find new clues. So his footage of the interview as he talks about how he manually strangled them. Then like his hands go under the table and you kind of see him move his arms. And then Rick Bell says that he was in fact pleasuring himself as he's recalling these stories. It shows the video feed to a courthouse in Cleveland for Payton and Evans with some of the footage. He pleads guilty. December 2018, Sergeant Versace goes back to Texas to interview Little again about the Jane Doe. It shows the 1978 reconstruction of her face. Little remembers her well. But the one detail Versace is looking for is the fact that she wore a wig. And it fell off. It fell off and her hair was plaited, which Little tells him that. So Versace, I'm thinking he may be lying and wanting credit. When he takes a crayon to correct the reconstruction photo, and then believes it when he corrects the drawn diagram of the crime scene. So Little is her killer, but she's still a Jane Doe. So then we jump to 2020 Quantico. Palazzolo on 60 cases matched and confirmed to Sam Little, at least as far as this. But at least a dozen they just cannot find. Her and Williamson on One That Haunts Them, which is a case from Vegas around 1993, where he met a woman who introduced him to her son, and he took her away and killed her. Her son actually met the killer. Still unable to find a match for that case. Footage of Little telling that story. FBI turns to media to show portraits for help for the public. It shows a montage of news outlets talking about Sam Little, showing the portraits. Family members on being able to find out who their killer was, and how some families may never get that. In 2018, over 49 days of interviews Sam Little is sent back to California. He continues drawing victims' portraits. Holland continues to interview him. How, if it was never for Palazzolo, Williamson, and Holland, Sam Little would have died in prison without ever confessing to all these murders. And then it shows the tip line for 1-800-CALL-FBI. So that is the very full of information, 3-hour, 2-part documentary, The 93 Victims of Sam Little. So it doesn't go into all 93 victims, but it's still very informative. It does jump around timelines quite a bit. It can get kind of confusing. But I do like how the first episode is all build up to sort of the background and how everything led to that a fateful interview where he did confess to 93 murders. And then the second episode is all, him going over the portraits. And so it doesn't go into all 93, which is fine. Although I kind of would be interested in like maybe a 10-part documentary where he goes over all of them. So it is very full of information. It does bounce around a lot, but I did find it very interesting. It's definitely worth a watch. I saw it on Tubi, so you can check it out there. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, that's that. I do want to see Confronting a Serial Killer, which is, I think, a 5-part Sam Little documentary, that was directed by Joe Berlinger. I think the next review I'll be doing is Bizarre Bizarre, which is a trauma documentary on Robert Berdella. Beyond that, I'm not sure what I'll be doing, so stay tuned for whatever's next, and thank you for watching.